In the heart of California, a geological time bomb is ticking. And here's where it gets really terrifying. The San Andreas Fault, which spans 1,200 kilometers across California, serves as the state's tectonic backbone. For more than a century, this fault has silently accumulated energy, waiting for the right moment to unleash its fury. As the Pacific and North American plates collide, their movement should be slow, yet they are locked, causing stress with each passing instant. When the fault eventually ruptures, California will be hit by a massive earthquake, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The scary truth is that this disaster is not a distant threat. It is an impending reality that will occur during our lives. Recent seismic activity in the Parkfield region has scientists concerned that a large earthquake, possibly on the scale of the deadly 7.9 magnitude quake that demolished San Francisco in 1906, is approaching. What exact seismic events or patterns have been observed in the Parkfield region? Can anything realistically reduce the chance of a 1906 scale earthquake? The answers may be more horrifying than you could have imagined. California's central region is home to a geological mystery that has been intriguing scientists for over a century. At the epicenter of this mystery lies the Parkfield section of the infamous San Andreas Fault, which slices through the sleepy town of Parkfield. With a population of just 18 people, Parkfield may be tiny, but it holds a seismic secret that has captivated scientists for generations. For reasons not fully understood, this part of the San Andreas Fault experiences moderate earthquakes around magnitude 6.0 at regular intervals. Historical records show a fascinating pattern with notable earthquakes in 1857, 1881, 1901, 1922, 1934, and 1966. In each case, the ground moved and trembled, sending regular bursts of shaking and vibration through the area. This consistent occurrence, averaging approximately 22 years between events, has turned Parkfield into a natural laboratory. The most recent quake happened on September 28, 2004, when a magnitude 6.0 tremor rocked the region. It was felt throughout the state and even in the San Francisco Bay Area. Though moderate, the quake provided valuable data, enabling scientists to examine the intricate dynamics of fault rupture and the indicators that precede seismic events. Recognizing the research opportunities presented by this fault segment, an ambitious initiative was started, the San Andreas Fault Observatory at Depth, SAFOD. Just north of Parkfield, a team of scientists embarked on a bold mission to drill into the core of the San Andreas Fault. By placing an array of sensors 2 to 3 kilometers deep within the Earth's crust, they had hoped to gain unparalleled insights into the intricate interplay of tectonic forces that drive earthquake behavior. Now, their data suggests the fault is once again building up substantial strain energy, much like the periods preceding previous quakes. What's more, the broader San Andreas Fault system has exhibited heightened seismic activity in recent years. Smaller earthquakes, while not necessarily a direct precursor to a large event, can sometimes be a sign that major stress is accumulating along the fault. Of course, predicting the timing and magnitude of earthquakes remains an imperfect science. But with the clock ticking, we will explore the recent unusual activity in the San Andreas Fault, what the history of seismic activities in the region can tell us about the recent observations, and why we might be on the verge of a major earthquake. But before we dive into the terrifying details, let's establish some context. Southern California is no stranger to earthquakes, with residents experiencing an average of 10,000 quakes per year. Most of these quakes are too small to be felt, but the sheer number is a stark reminder that the state is crisscrossed by 500 active faults, any of which could unleash a nightmare of shaking at any moment. But there's one major fault line that stands out from the rest, and that's the San Andreas Fault. This infamous fault runs for 800 miles, stretching from above San Francisco, past Los Angeles, across the Mexican border, and into the Gulf of California. The San Andreas Fault has been around for an astonishing 30 million years, created by the meeting of two tectonic plates, the Pacific and the North American. To understand how the San Andreas Fault works, Imagine two very slow and very heavy trains lumbering past each other in opposite directions. One train, the Pacific Plate, is heading northwest, while the other, the North American Plate, is heading southeast. You'd think they'd be in constant motion, ever so slowing passing each other without a hitch. But that's not what happens. Instead, the trains are so weighed down with luggage and passengers that they get caught on each other and come to a stop. Rather than separating them, the engine drivers keep adding more coal until a huge amount of energy builds up. Finally, that energy gets to be too much and everything snaps. The train lurches forward, away from each other, causing their carriages to shake and making a whole bunch of people fall over. That, in a very simplified form, is what's happening with the San Andreas Fault. In the 30 million years of its existence, the two plates have moved an impressive 350 miles past each other. But aside from a relatively calm section in central California, they've been doing it in sudden bursts, each of which means one thing and one thing only: earthquake time. Technically, this is known as a strike-slip fault, less common than other types, but that's not what makes the San Andreas so noteworthy. The reason geologists are concerned about the San Andreas Fault can be summed up with a single worrying statistic. The vast majority of Californians live in the area around the fault. That includes everyone in LA, San Francisco, San Bernardino, San Jose, Santa Barbara, and many more. In some places, towns have been built directly on top of the fault, like San Francisco's Bay Area Rapid Transit System, which runs a tunnel right through the middle of the fault. All this means that any quake caused by the San Andreas Fault has the potential to be devastating. Take the 1994 Northridge quake caused by one of San Andreas' secondary faults. It struck the San Fernando Valley at around 4:30 a.m., measuring 6.7 on the Richter scale. That quake collapsed buildings, killing 57 people and causing around $200 billion in damages. That's scary, right? Well, just know that the Northridge quake wasn't even near to being the big one. It was barely a hiccup in terms of what the San Andreas Fault is capable of. To get a glimpse of what it's like when the San Andreas really ruptures, we need to go back in time to witness one of the worst natural disasters in U.S. history. The Great San Francisco Earthquake of 1906 is a chilling example of the San Andreas Fault's destructive power. On April 18, 1906, a massive earthquake struck at 5:12 a.m., measuring around 7.9 on the Richter scale. The quake lasted for a terrifying 48 seconds, causing widespread destruction and fires that burned for days. The aftermath was nothing short of apocalyptic. Over 80% of San Francisco was destroyed, leaving hundreds of thousands of people homeless. The death toll was estimated to be around 3,000, although some reports put it much higher. The economic losses were staggering, with estimates ranging from $350 million to $500 million in 2006 dollars, equivalent to over $13 billion today. Now, here's the big question. Although the region has been prone to many disasters in the past, how are we sure of an impending earthquake in the region? The San Andreas Fault is a name etched in the minds of disaster-conscious Americans, thanks in part to the dramatic portrayals in the film industry. But the reality is just as gripping. The fault line has left a trail of devastation in its wake, from the 1906 San Francisco earthquake to the 1857 Southern California quake. While the 21st century has seen a relative calm, scientists warn that a major earthquake is overdue, with a significant likelihood of a massive tremor striking the fault line within the next 50 years. Predicting earthquakes, however, remains an elusive task, unlike other natural forces such as hurricanes, tornadoes, or wildfires. But a recent study published in Frontiers in Earth Science hints that a section of this notorious fault may be building up to a significant event. The paper raises crucial questions about the possibility of detecting preparatory phases before major earthquakes and whether these phases are common to all major tremors. The focal point of this study is the section of the fault near Parkfield, a small town in central California with a population of just over 24. This seismically dynamic location is characterized by a unique behavior. with the fault creeping at a rate of 1.4 inches per year north of Parkfield, while remaining locked in place to the south. The U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, labels this stretch as a transition zone between the creeping and locked behavior of the fault. Historically, earthquakes in this area occur every 22 years, but the last quake took place in 2004, 14 years ahead of schedule. Scientists seized the opportunity to collect data, which revealed valuable insights into earthquake physics and the effects of strike-slip earthquakes worldwide. The new study's lead author, Luca Malaganini, suggests that the area is now entering the end of its quiet phase. Malaganini's research highlights the significance of sound wave attenuation, which showed distinct patterns in the 2004 quake. As stress builds up, cracks form affecting permeability and the behavior of high and low frequency waves. A striking similarity was observed in the region in 2021, with the attenuation of high frequency waves dropping 6 weeks prior to the earthquake. While the fault near Parkfield has skipped quakes before, Malaganini warns that an eruption is likely soon. But an insane curiosity, we are not one for sensationalism, so it's important to state that in geological time, soon means any time from now to the next 100,000 years. What other evidence supports the threat of the southern San Andreas Fault? In 2006, a renowned geophysicist named Yuri Fialko from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography conducted a study that set off alarm bells in the scientific community. Through a meticulous analysis of data gathered over decades, Fialko and his team uncovered a deeply unsettling revelation. The southern segment of the San Andreas Fault had reached a critical stress threshold, priming it for a catastrophic rupture of magnitude 7.0 or greater. This finding carried chilling implications. The region surrounding Los Angeles, a sprawling metropolitan area home to millions, was sitting atop this seismic time bomb. The southern stretch of the fault, extending through San Bernardino, Riverside, and Imperial counties in California, as well as the Mexican border area, had not experienced a significant release of pent-up tectonic strain for over 3 centuries. As the relentless grind of the Pacific and North American plates continued, immense forces were steadily building, straining the fault line to its limit. With each passing year, the risk of catastrophic rupture grew even higher. Fialko's study painted a grim picture of the potential devastation. A major earthquake along the southern San Andreas Fault would unleash destruction unlike anything seen in modern times. Older buildings, ill-equipped to withstand such violent shaking, could crumble like houses of cards. Soil liquefaction in coastal areas could destabilize entire neighborhoods. Beyond the immediate epicenter, the shockwaves could ripple outward, rattling the foundations of the region's critical infrastructure. Major transportation arteries could be severed, cutting off vital supply lines and emergency response efforts. Now, advanced satellite-based geodetic techniques such as GPS and INSAR have allowed scientists to precisely measure the gradual deformation and movement of the Earth's surface around the San Andreas Fault. These measurements confirm that the southern segment is accumulating strain at a rapid pace, with the Pacific and North American plates grinding past each other at a rate of approximately 35 to 40 millimeters per year. Yet amidst this threatening scenario, the study also underscored the urgent need for preparedness and mitigation efforts. The scientific community has sounded the alarm, and now it is up to local authorities, emergency services, and the public to heed the warning and take the necessary steps to safeguard lives and minimize the potential for catastrophic loss. The Cascadia Megaquake isn't just a possibility, it's an inevitable disaster. This seismic beast, expected to hit the Pacific Northwest, threatens to rival the most destructive earthquakes in U.S. history. The Cascadia subduction zone, a 700-mile fault line off North America's west coast, has been building tension for centuries, and experts predict a magnitude 9.0 earthquake. The 1700 quake left a trail of destruction, submerging towns and creating tsunamis that reached as far as Japan. Now, the stakes are even higher, with over 13 million lives and trillions of dollars in infrastructure at risk. In this video, we break down the science, examine potential impacts, and gauge our preparedness for the big one. Ready? Let's dive in. California, perched on the western edge of North America, is a hotbed of seismic activity thanks to its spot along the boundary of the Pacific and North American plates. Just north of California, there's the Cascadia subduction zone, a geological powerhouse stretching from northern California all the way to British Columbia. Here, the Juan de Fuca plate is sliding under the North American plate, stirring up earthquakes and volcanic action. This 700-mile-long fault line has been a ticking seismic time bomb. Geologists have been hard at work analyzing layers of soil, estuaries, beaches, and tidal flats around the Pacific Northwest. Using radiocarbon dating, they've pieced together a timeline of 40 massive earthquakes over the last 9,850 years. That averages out to one earthquake every 246 years. For context, the last big quake rocked Cascadia 324 years ago, meaning we're technically 78 years overdue. But averages are just that, averages. Earthquakes have hit as close as 27 years apart and as far as 577 years apart. So, while we might be partly right in saying the big one is overdue, the reality is not that straightforward. To kick things off, let's take a closer look at the fascinating area where this dangerous fault line is located. The Pacific Northwest, one of the most stunning regions in the U.S., is famous for its rugged coastlines, dense forests, lively cities, and breathtaking mountain peaks, including some pretty impressive volcanoes. It's also a hub of innovation, giving the world staples like Microsoft and Starbucks. With its national parks and endless outdoor activities, the region draws millions of visitors and is home to 13 million people, a number that's growing fast. But beneath all this beauty and bustling growth lies a serious threat: the Cascadia subduction zone. This massive fault line, which shaped the Pacific Northwest's iconic landscapes, is also capable of unleashing earthquakes and tsunamis of staggering proportions. The last big one hit on January 26, 1700, shaking the region and sending tsunamis across the Pacific. Now, experts warn that the big one could strike again, possibly reaching a magnitude of 9.3. That would make it one of the strongest earthquakes ever recorded. The fallout would be catastrophic. Tens of thousands of lives lost, entire communities destroyed, and life in the Pacific Northwest changed forever. The scary part? It's not about if it'll happen, it's about when. But to understand the scale and impact of this ticking time bomb, let's travel back to the 1700 Cascadia megathrust earthquake. On January 26, 1700, around 9 p.m., a massive earthquake estimated at magnitude 9.0 shook the Cascadia subduction zone. The ground shook violently for nearly 10 minutes, affecting areas from Vancouver Island to Cape Mendocino in California and everything in between. A tsunami towering as high as 100 feet crashed onto the coast, obliterating Native American villages and creating a night of unimaginable terror for indigenous tribes from California to British Columbia. But the event of that night was only the beginning. On January 27, 10 hours after the earthquake occurred, out in the ocean, the sudden shift in tectonic plates pushed an unimaginable volume of water upward. That water didn't stay still for long. A tsunami with waves as tall as 16 feet, born thousands of miles away, slammed into Japan's coast. Villages were swept into the sea, families were torn apart, and lives changed forever. A particular village, Miyako, located in the Tohoku region of northern Honshu, Japan, was wrecked. According to documentation from local magistrates, samurai, and villagers, houses were destroyed. But that wasn't all. Records from the magistrate of Achuti accounted for the ruin of several houses and rice fields, which were sent to the Tokugawa shogunate. The Japanese called these orphan waves because there had been no warning, no earthquake to shake the ground, no reason to flee. It was a mystery they couldn't solve at the time, though they carefully recorded every detail: how high the waves were, how far they reached, and how much they took. Thanks to Japan's meticulous record-keeping during the Edo period, we know the exact date and time of the disaster. Interestingly, no earthquakes were reported in Kamchatka, Alaska, or Chile around the same time, which left Cascadia as the only plausible source for the massive tsunami. After piecing together the historical accounts and geological data, scientists identified the earthquake in the Cascadia region as the cause of the disaster that struck Japan's east coast. Unlike the Japanese, who documented their histories in writing, the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest preserved their past through oral traditions. The War of the Thunderbird and the Whale was one attempt to explain the 1700 Cascadia earthquake. According to this legend, it was a night so dark and stormy it felt like the world was about to end. And that's when Thunderbird made her move. Out of nowhere, she swooped down from the storm clouds, her massive wings silent and invisible in the black sky. In her claws, she snatched up the whale, her ancient rival. Then she rose high into the night, higher than anyone could see. And when she finally let go, the whale descended to the earth, hitting the ground with such force that the world itself shook. That's when everything went sideways. The ocean pulled back from the shore, so far back that the bay was left completely dry. For the people on the coast, that was the first sign. The wise ones grabbed their canoes and paddled out as fast as they could. They knew what was coming. The water came roaring back like a monster, swallowing entire villages. People, homes, and everything they'd ever known were swept away. The lucky ones who survived told of canoes stuck in treetops and land that looked completely unrecognizable. So, what caused the conflict between these legendary creatures? Some say Thunderbird was a hero, protecting the world from the evil whale. Others thought she was the villain, attacking an innocent creature. But the Thunderbird and the whale story wasn't the only explanation people had. Up on Vancouver Island, the Huayat people told a different tale. They believed dwarfs living in a giant mountain had invited a man to dance around their sacred drum. But the man accidentally kicked the drum, and somehow the sound got trapped in his foot. When he left the mountain, every step he took made the earth shake, causing the flood that destroyed their villages. Further south in Northern California, the Yurok people told of a being called Earthquake. They said he had huge, heavy feet that cracked the earth wherever he ran. On that same night, an earthquake tore up the coastline, shaking the ground and sending the ocean inland. The Yurok gathered on a hilltop and danced to drive him away. But when they came down, their homes were gone, drowned beneath the floodwaters. These stories are all that's left to explain what happened that night. Whether it was Thunderbird, earthquake, or something else entirely, one thing is clear: the world shook, the waters rose, and life along the coast was never the same. It took centuries before anyone connected the dots. The earthquake in Cascadia and the devastation in Japan were part of the same story. This wasn't just a local disaster, it was a global one. The 1700 Cascadia earthquake left behind a level of destruction that forever changed the region's landscape and its people. When the ground shook, it caused parts of the coastline to rise and fall. Some areas were lifted above sea level, while others sank into the ocean. But the reshaping of the coast didn't just change the land. It wiped out fishing grounds and altered the river mouths that were once a source of trade and transportation to those who lived around and traveled through it. For indigenous communities, the effects were devastating. Their fishing grounds, essential for food and trade, were lost, and with them, a way of life. The land that had supported their crops and offered resources for tools and shelter was now changed beyond recognition. But it wasn't just indigenes. Settler communities faced similar struggles. The infrastructure they had built was damaged, and food became scarce. Trade routes were cut off or altered, making it difficult to get the supplies they needed. Even the rivers and oceans, which had sustained the region's ecosystems, were affected. The tsunamis and flooding that followed disrupted the estuaries and tidal flats that salmon and other fish relied on for breeding. For the indigenous people, the loss of salmon was especially devastating, as it was their primary food source. Without the fish, the region faced a severe food shortage. The ecosystems that had supported life in the region for so long took decades to begin to recover. However, for many decades afterward, the true extent of this incident was largely unknown. Why was the scale unknown? And what exactly is the true science behind these quakes in the Cascadia subduction zone? The scientific community largely dismissed Native American legends and Japanese records about catastrophic events tied to the Cascadia region until the 1980s. That's when geologists began to rethink their assumptions about the Cascadia subduction zone. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, geologist Brian Atwater and biologist David Yamaguchi conducted groundbreaking research that changed the narrative. Their studies on the Cascadia subduction zone revealed a history of massive earthquakes, convincing the scientific community that this seismic fault was far more dangerous than previously thought. Atwater's work in particular shifted the consensus, highlighting the immense threat this fault posed to over 13 million residents in the Pacific Northwest. Atwater's research uncovered compelling geological evidence of past megaquakes by examining soil layers, tidal zones, and the growth rings of old coastal trees. Three key indicators pointed to the region's seismic history: rapid land subsidence, where land suddenly drops, layers of marine sand trapped between estuarine mud, and signs of abrupt stress or death in trees. These clues were directly linked to the plate dynamics beneath the Cascadia region. Specifically, land subsidence occurred when the North American plate slipped under during a major earthquake. To grasp this, it's essential to understand the type of earthquake unique to Cascadia, the megathrust earthquake. These are the most powerful earthquakes on Earth. The term megathrust combines their scale, mega, with the mechanics of their origin, thrust faults. A thrust fault forms when compressive tectonic forces push one layer of rock over another. As tectonic plates collide and compress, one plate inevitably slides under the other, creating immense pressure. In subduction zones like Cascadia, this process happens on a massive scale, making them colossal thrust faults. In the Cascadia subduction zone, the smaller Juan de Fuca plate dives beneath the much larger North American plate. This action causes the North American plate to crumple and rise slightly. However, during a megathrust earthquake, the stress built up between the plates is suddenly released, forcing the uplifted North American plate to drop back to equilibrium. Some coastal areas can sink by as much as 6 feet in an instant. An example of this phenomena is the Copalis Ghost Forest in Washington. There, a grove of western red cedar and Douglas fir trees died abruptly due to land subsidence triggered by the 1700 Cascadia earthquake. Another key piece of evidence is the layers of sand found between mud in coastal estuaries. These sand deposits are remnants of tsunamis that followed major earthquakes. When a tsunami crashes onto the land, it carries sand and marine debris, which settles over muddy tidal zones in rivers and wetlands. Over time, mud covers the sand, and the process repeats as subsequent earthquakes and tsunamis strike. Atwater's team discovered these sand layers in nearly every estuary from Canada to California, from small creeks to large rivers like the Columbia. These findings provided a clear record of repeated tsunamis over thousands of years. Finally, the sudden death or stress observed in trees in low-lying coastal areas provided another smoking gun. The simultaneous subsidence, sand deposits, and tree stress directly aligned with the 1700 Cascadia earthquake. These trees, particularly in ghost forests like those in Copalis, tell a story of dramatic land changes and environmental upheaval. All told, Atwater's team identified evidence of 40 major earthquakes in the Cascadia subduction zone over the last 9,860 years. This averages to one major quake every 246 years. However, the timing between events has varied widely, with intervals ranging from as short as 27 years to as long as 577 years. The last megathrust earthquake in the region occurred in 1700, meaning 324 years have passed since. Although the average recurrence suggests these events happen every 246 years, the variability in timing adds uncertainty to predicting the next catastrophic earthquake. Statistically, one could argue that the big one is overdue, particularly when considering the average recurrence intervals of major earthquakes. However, averages can be misleading. For example, the average of 10 could result from both 9 and 11, or from 1 and 19. What we can agree on is that there is a 14% chance of an earthquake of magnitude 9 or greater occurring by 2050, alongside a 37% likelihood of an earthquake of magnitude 8 in the same time frame. A magnitude 9 event would indicate a complete rupture of the Cascadia subduction zone, while a magnitude 8 would likely result in a partial rupture, potentially affecting either the northern region near Vancouver or the southern region in Northern California and Southern Oregon. So, what does this mean for the approximately 13 million residents of the Pacific Northwest? The outlook is concerning. The Cascadia subduction zone itself was not identified until 1970, and earlier assumptions suggested it was either inactive or dormant. It wasn't until research by Atwater gained traction in the 1990s that awareness increased. Unfortunately, by that time, cities like Seattle, Portland, and Tacoma had already developed significantly. Seismic building codes were only implemented in 1994, leaving countless structures, including homes, bridges, and commercial buildings, constructed before then at considerable risk of collapse during a megathrust earthquake. A FEMA spokesperson aptly summarized the potential devastation, stating, "Our operating assumption is that everything west of I-5 will be toast." But seriously, what does toast even mean in this context? What does a magnitude 9 earthquake feel like? Stay tuned, as we're going to tackle all these questions and more. First, we'll dive into Cascadia's geologic setting by checking out other subduction zones. Then, we'll break down what a magnitude 9 earthquake really means by looking at how earthquake magnitudes are calculated and what it would feel like. Finally, we'll discuss what could happen in the Pacific Northwest if one of these massive megaquakes hits. Let's get started. The scientific literature indicates that a significant earthquake, potentially as powerful as magnitude 9.3, could occur in the Cascadia subduction zone. This region is notable because all recorded earthquakes above magnitude 9.0 have taken place in subduction zones. A prime example is the 2004 Sumatra earthquake, which registered a devastating 9.2 on the moment magnitude scale and resulted in the tragic loss of approximately 230,000 lives. It's essential to clarify that the moment magnitude scale, which is currently used by geologists, has replaced the old Richter scale for measuring seismic activity. The Richter scale has been outdated for about 45 years due to its inability to account for various factors influencing earthquake strength. The moment magnitude scale is logarithmic, meaning that each whole number increase on the scale signifies a 32-fold rise in the earthquake's total energy release. For instance, an earthquake with a magnitude of 8.0 is 32 times more powerful than one measuring 7.0, and it is a staggering 1,024 times more powerful than the one measuring 6.0. Recent studies by seismologists estimate that the maximum potential earthquake along the Cascadia subduction zone could reach a magnitude of 9.3. This assessment is based on the dimensions of the fault itself. The locked zone of the Cascadia subduction zone is approximately 1,000 kilometers long and on average about 83 kilometers wide. To grasp the potential strength of an earthquake should the entire fault line rupture, we can employ some calculations. The rigidity constant of basalt, the primary rock type along the Cascadia Fault, is about 78 gigapascals, or 7.8 times 10 to the power of 10 newtons per square meter. The last significant rupture of this fault occurred in 1700, and the Juan de Fuca plate, which is the tectonic plate involved, moves at an average rate of 1.6 inches per year. Over the 324 years since the last major rupture, this translates to an accumulated strain of approximately 58.4 inches or 43.2 feet, which is equivalent to about 13.17 meters. If the entire fault were to release this accumulated strain in a single rupture, it could theoretically produce an earthquake with a magnitude of around 9.22. However, this scenario assumes that all stress has built up since 1700 without any release, which is unlikely. A more realistic possibility involves a partial rupture of the Cascadia subduction zone. For instance, if only 520 kilometers of the fault were to slip, with a slip width of 46 kilometers and only 5.5 meters of the accumulated strain were to be released, we would use the same calculations to estimate the moment magnitude. In this case, the earthquake would register at approximately 8.59. These calculations are consistent with estimates by the U.S. Geological Survey, the USGS, and other geological organizations, which anticipate significant seismic activity in the region. Understanding these potential scenarios is crucial for preparedness and risk management in the Cascadia subduction zone. The implications of such powerful earthquakes are far-reaching, affecting infrastructure, emergency response, and community resilience. Hey everyone, just a quick pause. If you're enjoying this video, please like it, subscribe, and tap that bell for instant updates. Now, what can we expect to go down when Cascadia finally erupts? We've run the numbers on two scenarios, a magnitude 9.2 full rupture and a magnitude 8.6 partial rupture. Let's focus on the full rupture because, let's face it, a partial rupture, while still serious, would be far less catastrophic and more geologically limited. By diving into the full rip scenario, we're essentially preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. So let's set the stage. It's a hot summer afternoon in the Pacific Northwest. People are leaving work early, hoping to escape the sweltering heat. Traffic is gridlocked as cars inch towards beaches, rivers, and lakes. Coastal towns like Seaside, Astoria, Newport, Ocean Shores, Arcata, and Brookings are packed with visitors. Many people from inland areas like Redding and Medford have also joined the throngs heading towards the coast. Little do they know they're moving into the heart of the tsunami zone. Meanwhile, just offshore, the Cascadia subduction zone has reached its breaking point. Decades of strain between the Juan de Fuca and North American tectonic plates are about to unleash an unimaginable force. The fault line, stretching from Vancouver to Northern California, begins to slip. Seconds before the ground starts shaking, phones across the region buzz with an emergency alert. Earthquake warning, drop, cover, hold on. Scientists monitoring the situation from the USGS and seismology labs worldwide are already on high alert as their instruments detect the primary P waves of the quake. These are the silent precursors to the ground-shaking secondary S waves. The alert buys precious time for some. Many scramble under desks or door frames, but others freeze in panic, unsure of what to do, or worse, they dismiss the warning altogether. Pets and wildlife, more attuned to nature's signals, are already in a frenzy. Dogs bark, birds scatter, and livestock grow restless. And then it begins. A deafening roar like 1,000 freight trains fills the air. The ground starts shaking violently, tossing people and objects. For over 5 minutes, an eternity in an earthquake, buildings sway, bridges crack, and infrastructure crumbles. In waterlogged areas like Seattle, Portland, and other low-lying regions, the shaking turns solid ground into liquefied sludge. Entire neighborhoods sink and twist as the earth falls beneath them. Buildings constructed before the seismic codes of 1994 stand no chance. They collapse, burying tens of thousands under rubble. Utility lines rupture, sparking fires and spewing sewage into the streets. Major highways like I-5, I-90, and I-84 are devastated as overpasses and bridges buckle. Airports in Seattle and Portland are rendered useless as liquefaction destroys their runways, leaving them unable to receive emergency aid. Some people survive the initial shaking, but the challenges have only just begun. With utilities out, water unsafe to drink, and roads destroyed, survivors must fend for themselves. Aid could take weeks, if not months, to arrive, leaving many unprepared for the harsh realities of living off the grid. For those along the coast, the nightmare doesn't end when the shaking stops. A massive tsunami with waves over 100 feet tall in some places is racing towards the shore. Residents have 15 to 30 minutes to reach higher ground. Panic sets in. Roads are clogged with cars and debris, and many people on foot simply can't outrun the wave. When the tsunami hits, it obliterates everything in its path. Entire towns are swallowed, leaving behind little more than muddy ruins. Thousands of lives are lost as the wall of water crashes over the Pacific Northwest coastline. Survivors who make it to higher ground can only watch in horror as the ocean consumes everything they once knew. By the time the quake and tsunami subside, the Pacific Northwest is unrecognizable. Cities like Seattle and Portland are shattered. Skyscrapers have crumbled, bridges have vanished, and fires rage uncontrollably. Landslides in mountainous regions bury roads and villages, cutting off entire communities. Coastal areas are permanently altered, with some regions sinking by as much as 6 feet due to rapid subsidence. FEMA estimates that a magnitude 9.2 earthquake in Cascadia could kill around 13,000 people and injure 27,000 more. However, these numbers could skyrocket, as the region is home to 13 million people. Seattle-Tacoma alone houses 4 million, and Portland adds another 2.2 million, many of whom live in buildings that aren't up to modern seismic standards. If you think this sounds exaggerated, let's look at history. In 2011, Japan, the global leader in earthquake preparedness, was struck by the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. Even with their gold standard engineering, over 20,000 lives were lost. If the most seismically prepared nation couldn't escape such a catastrophe, why would a region like Cascadia fare better? We've also seen the grim consequences of ignoring seismic activity in Turkey. In 2023, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake killed over 60,000 people, largely because poorly built structures collapsed. While the Pacific Northwest buildings aren't as subpar, a disturbing number still lack proper seismic retrofitting and will likely crumble under the pressure of a major quake. But there is hope. It is much more likely that a partial rupture will occur rather than a full one. While a partial rupture would still be significant, with potential magnitudes ranging from 7.6 to 8.6, it would be far less catastrophic than a full magnitude 9 event. Moreover, progress is being made. Since 2014, seismic retrofitting has become a priority across the Pacific Northwest. In Portland, for instance, there were no earthquake-resistant bridges a decade ago. Today, 2 bridges meet seismic standards, and more are being reinforced. Similar efforts are underway in cities like Seattle and Eugene. Schools, hospitals, and critical infrastructure are being upgraded to withstand a major quake. Emergency preparedness campaigns have also ramped up, encouraging families to stock up on supplies, create evacuation plans, and learn basic survival skills. Awareness is growing, and while there's still a long way to go, the region is slowly becoming more resilient. Despite these efforts, it's still a race against the clock. If the big one were to strike tomorrow, the Pacific Northwest would face an unparalleled disaster. However, if it holds off for another decade or two, the region will be in a much better position to withstand the blow. Ultimately, preparation is the key. While no one can stop the Cascadia subduction zone from unleashing its fury, building resilient infrastructure and cultivating a culture of readiness could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. For now, the clock is ticking, and every effort counts. More earthquakes in the new Madrid Fault. What's going on? Most people in the United States, and perhaps around the world, only know one fault line by name, the San Andreas Fault, which runs almost the entire length of California and is often said to be on the verge of triggering the big one. However, for at least the past 20 years, geologists have been telling us something different. That the real danger for the USA on a much higher level comes from a seismic region that the media, busy emphasizing the threat that inevitably destroys Los Angeles in disaster movies, have paid very little attention to. Yes, we're talking about the New Madrid seismic zone, which has recently been shaken by a series of earthquakes. Weak, but absolutely unsettling. In this video, we'll try to shed some light on this and answer an intriguing question that arises from examining the chronology of earthquakes in this area. Namely, do earthquakes have a preferred season to occur? And do those in New Madrid perhaps favor the winter? One thing is almost certain. When thinking about earthquake risks, the hills of western Tennessee are not the first thing that comes to mind. But as we are about to see, it would be a mistake to underestimate them from this perspective. Just east of the famous subduction zones of California and the Pacific Northwest lies the New Madrid seismic zone. This highly active area includes parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Missouri, Illinois, Arkansas, and Mississippi, and is responsible for the largest historical earthquakes in the United States east of the Rocky Mountains. Experts warn that a major earthquake near the town of New Madrid today would cause extensive damage to buildings, bridge collapses, disruptions to essential services, and failures of levees and slopes for hundreds of miles. It's a threat that those living and working in the region cannot afford to ignore. But why such pessimism? The answer, at least for now, lies not in the present, but in the past. We know for certain that in December of 1811, an invisible force gripped the central Mississippi Valley and did not let go for weeks. A series of major earthquakes caused the riverbed to rise and fall as if it were a stormy sea. On February 7, 1812, just upstream from New Madrid, the land was deformed to the point that the mighty Mississippi began to flow north instead of south. That event was the culmination of a period of terror known as the New Madrid earthquakes. This period began exactly on December 16, 1811, when at 2 in the morning, the first shock hit what is now the southern tip of the state of Missouri. Residents of both rural and urban areas woke up to furniture bouncing and porcelain dishes shattering. Then the houses literally began to move off their foundations. Anyone who could rushed into the streets and stayed there, trembling from the cold and fear. For many others caught in their sleep, the once peaceful and safe homes suddenly became deadly traps. In the hours before dawn, the ground continued to shake, though with less intensity. Around 7 o'clock, there was another violent shock. Then, around 11, there was an even stronger one. Fissures opened in the ground, spewing mud and sulfurous gas that contaminated the air. Eyewitnesses saw thousands of birds flying away from the area as if they had gone mad. When the violence of the tremor ceased, Little Prairie, a town in Missouri, was completely leveled. Lesser tremors continued until January 1812, and on the morning of January 23rd, around 9 o'clock, another strong earthquake struck the surviving population. Point Pleasant, already battered, was near the epicenter, and the inhabitants fled. When some returned in February, they realized that the town was gone. It had all slipped into the Mississippi. But it wasn't over yet. The disaster continued to strike the region. On February 7, 1812, before dawn, the restless sleep of the inhabitants of that area was again interrupted by tremendous seismic waves. The epicenter was beneath them. This earthquake, more violent than all the previous ones, was so strong that in Cincinnati, Ohio, 650 kilometers away, it knocked down chimneys. The fury of the earthquake, however, was particularly unleashed on the river town of New Madrid. The shocks of 1811 had already severely damaged the small town, killing several residents and forcing most of the survivors to leave. But the quake on February 7th delivered the final blow. The tremor was so powerful that within 3 minutes, seismic waves reached Charleston, Washington, and Boston. The shaking lasted 15 minutes, and needless to say, even the sturdiest brick and stone houses collapsed to their foundations for miles around. St. Louis and Louisville suffered significant damage. Aftershocks pounded the region for days. Out of a population of about 15,000 in the affected area, The death toll exceeded 1,000 and at least 5,000 people were left homeless. You might think that the human losses weren't as terrible compared to the recent carnage in Haiti in 2010 and Turkey in 2023. But you'll change your mind when you consider that at that time, the population density was 1 person per square kilometer. We also have to account for the deaths among the native populations, whose numbers were never known. In their territories, too, the ground was ripped apart and then covered with sand boils, fissures, and crevices. Dead trees were everywhere. Swamps were lifted and drained, while good pasture land was submerged by new enormous lakes, and countless Indian villages vanished from the face of the earth. The still young United States had never experienced a disaster of such magnitude. It's impossible to determine the exact magnitude of these earthquakes, as seismographs didn't exist in 1812. But it's believed that the most violent one far exceeded magnitude 8, making it one of the most intense ever observed in the continental United States. And this is just a quick account of what happened more than 2 centuries ago. A catastrophe that, thanks to the very low population density of the affected areas and the slow speed at which news spread back then, was soon forgotten by everyone, even the central government, which didn't even bother to bring aid to the survivors. But all this concerns the past. If we want to deal with the present, we must get used to the idea that seismic activity in this area still exists, and that in the meantime, the overall population of those places has risen to 5 million people. It would be an apocalypse if the shocks of 1811-1812 were to repeat today, don't you think? And it's easy to understand why with a simple calculation. If 2 centuries ago the percentage of victims relative to the population was 7%, not counting the losses among the natives, which are hard to compute, with a quake of the same power today, we should expect at least 300,000 deaths. A massacre. Okay, but so far we've only talked about the effects due to the region's seismicity. But what about the real cause? That is, what kind of monster lurks in the depths of these seemingly peaceful hills of Missouri? It was only in the early 20th century that the area began to attract numerous scientific expeditions, with flocks of geologists eager to understand what could have caused such intense earthquakes in a region where there are no surface faults like California's San Andreas. After decades of digging and studying, it was understood that the seismic activity in New Madrid is not due to the tug-of-war between 2 opposing tectonic plates, as is usually the case with most violent earthquakes. The critical zone is not on the edge of a plate, but near the center of the North American plate, buried 600 to 900 meters deep under thick river sediments. It's not surprising that even areas far from plate boundaries are occasionally hit by earthquakes. Even the largest and most stable plates, where geological movements ended billions of years ago, can sometimes experience internal deformation, mainly due to the pressures exerted on their edges. Another theoretical reason for the development of intraplate earthquakes could be the birth of a new margin, that is, a new rift zone caused by the splitting of a plate into 2 distinct plates. This seems to be the most likely case for New Madrid. It's estimated that 0.5% of the seismic energy released worldwide is attributable to earthquakes that originate far from plate boundaries. The remaining 99.5% is due to the more numerous and stronger ones that occur along plate margins. In the case of New Madrid, the harder, colder, drier, and less fractured crust of central United States can generate shocks over larger areas compared to earthquakes of comparable magnitude in the West. The geological structure of the New Madrid Fault Zone consists of layers of sedimentary rock like limestone, which spreads and amplifies the shocks, much like hitting a bass drum. Because of this chain effect, an earthquake along the New Madrid Fault Zone would travel farther and cause more damage than an earthquake of similar magnitude on the West Coast. Today, the New Madrid Fault Zone, which is active, continues to move, holds the highest seismic risk in North America east of the Rocky Mountains. As we've already mentioned, earthquakes cannot be predicted, but probabilities can be calculated based on evidence of past seismic activity. Scientists estimate that in New Madrid, there is a 10% chance of an earthquake with a magnitude greater than 7.5 on the Richter scale occurring in the next 50 years, and a 25 to 40% chance of a 6th or 7th magnitude earthquake in the same period. All of this, of course, would result in significant damage and loss of life. Currently near New Madrid, an average of 200 earthquakes occur each year, most of which are too small to be felt. About once a year, a magnitude 3.0 earthquake occurs, and about once every 10 years, a magnitude 5.0 or higher earthquake occurs. But is the New Madrid Fault still active and continue to pose a high risk to the population? There is no doubt about it. The tremors, those below magnitude 2, are imperceptible to the population but are still recorded by seismographs, occurring daily. And very frequently, at least once a month, there are those above magnitude 3. And just recently, we had proof of this, specifically on December 9th, when, within a few hours, a seismic swarm originating at a depth of 9 kilometers affected the area. According to Missouri's State Emergency Management Agency, 5 earthquakes were detected near Marston, Missouri, while 2 were detected near Ridgely, Tennessee. The strongest shock reached a magnitude of 3.0, and not all residents felt it. It's not much, but this trickle of vibrations still prompts us to never let our guard down. At Insane Curiosity, we use these insights to keep telling stories, doing our best to inform and warn, and also to spark some curiosity. For example, have you ever wondered if earthquakes have particular months or seasons when they strike with greater intensity? Personally, I asked myself this question while researching for this video, as I came across certain coincidences that I then tried to understand better. What coincidences? Well, mainly the fact that all the largest earthquakes in the New Madrid seismic zone have practically occurred during the cold season. Obviously, all those from 1811-1812, but not only those. In the list of earthquakes that have exceeded magnitude 4 since then, more than 70% occurred in the colder months, from October to March. This includes the strongest earthquake in this region since 1900, which occurred on November 4, 1903, with a magnitude of 5.1. Just a coincidence? Probably. But after reading various documents on what I'm about to summarize, I was convinced to find an alternative explanation, which I'll give you right at the end of the video, just before we say goodbye. There are many myths about earthquakes. One of the most widespread is that there is something called earthquake weather, which refers to weather conditions that usually precede earthquakes, such as hot and dry or dry and cloudy. The myth comes from the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who in the 4th century BC hypothesized that earthquakes were caused by very hot winds escaping from underground caves. With the advent of seismology, the science that seeks to rationally explain these phenomena, we now know that most earthquakes are caused by tectonic processes. That is, forces within the solid Earth that cause changes in the structure of the Earth's crust, mainly the breaking of underground rock masses along fault lines, linear zones of weakness. We also know that most earthquakes occur well below the Earth's surface, far beyond the influence of surface temperatures and conditions. Finally, we know that the statistical distribution of earthquakes is approximately equal in all types of weather conditions. Myth busted then? In fact, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, the only correlation that has been noted between earthquakes and weather conditions is that large changes in atmospheric pressure caused by major storms like hurricanes have occasionally been shown to trigger what are known as slow earthquakes, which release energy over relatively long periods and do not cause ground shaking like traditional earthquakes. The same scientists also assert that while such large low-pressure changes could potentially contribute to triggering a damaging earthquake, the numbers are small and not statistically significant. That's for the weather. But what about the climate? Could there be connections between recurring seasons and earthquakes? To answer this, we must first determine what types of tectonic processes could be related to climatic phenomena. Scientists know that earthquakes can be triggered or inhibited by changes in the amount of stress on a fault. The largest climatic variable that could alter fault stress loads is surface water in the form of rain and snow. It seems that several studies have already supported such connections, but there's a problem. Generally, we've seen this type of relationship in microseismicity, small earthquakes with magnitudes less than 0, much smaller than what humans can perceive. In this regard, it seems a link has been found between the amount of microseismicity in the Himalayas and the annual monsoon season. During the summer months, large amounts of rainfall fall on the Ganges Plain, which includes the northern regions of the Indian subcontinent. This increases stress loads on the Earth's crust and decreases levels of microseismicity in the adjacent Himalayas. So during the dry winter season, when there is less water weight in the crust in the plain, the Himalayan microseismicity peaks. This is also confirmed by a recent study published in Science Advances, where researchers report that episodes of heavy snowfall and rain have likely contributed to a swarm of earthquakes in recent years in northern Japan. The study is the first to show that climatic conditions could give rise to some earthquakes, focusing on a series of ongoing earthquakes in the Noto Peninsula in Japan. The team found that seismic activity in the region is surprisingly synchronized with certain changes in underground pressure, and that these changes are influenced by seasonal patterns of snowfall and precipitation. In short, the research shows that snowfall and other surface environmental loads impact the stress state underground, and therefore the climate obviously impacts the response of solid Earth, and part of that response is earthquakes. Scientists suspect that this new connection between earthquakes and climate might not be exclusive to Japan and could play a role in affecting other parts of the world. But they also say it's much more difficult to draw similar conclusions for larger earthquakes. The point is that we still don't know when a fault might be at the critical point where pressure related to a climatic process could be the straw that breaks the camel's back, causing a significant earthquake. And what about drought? We know that seasonal effects can cause changes on faults, but what about less periodic climatic phenomena like a long-term drought? Could they also cause changes? It appears that changes in stress loads on the Earth's crust due to periods of drought can indeed be significant. Research conducted by JPL scientists in 2017 found that alternating periods of drought and heavy precipitation in the Sierra Nevada between 2011 and 2017 actually caused the mountain range to rise by nearly an inch and then fall by half an inch. This happened because the mountain rocks lost water during the drought and then regained it. The study did not specifically examine the potential impacts on faults, but such stress changes could potentially be felt on faults in or near the range. Similarly, it has been shown that groundwater pumping from underground aquifers, which is often done recklessly during drought periods, impacts stress load patterns by unloading the Earth's crust. A 2014 study published in Nature examined the effects of groundwater extraction in California's Central Valley on the seismicity of the nearby San Andreas Fault. Researchers found that such extractions can increase stress levels on both sides of the fault, potentially causing the tectonic plates to slip and release seismic energy. These stresses are small, but if groundwater pumping continues over a long period, they could become more significant, potentially accelerating the onset of the next big earthquake in the Los Angeles area. Another climatic phenomenon believed to be connected to tectonic processes is glaciation. The retreat of a glacier can reduce stress loads on the underlying Earth's crust, affecting the movement of subsurface magma. A recent study in the journal Geology on volcanic activity in Iceland between 4,500 and 5,500 years ago, when the Earth was much colder than today, found a link between deglaciation and increased volcanic activity. Conversely, when the glacial cover increased, eruptions decreased. It has also been shown that the rapid movement of glaciers can cause so-called glacial earthquakes. Glacial earthquakes are intense seismic shocks, with magnitudes greater than 5.1, occurring in areas where the glacier moves faster than 1 kilometer per year. The number of glacial earthquakes in Greenland peaks every year in July, August, and September, and the number is increasing over time. This increase seems to be related to the progression of global warming. Moreover, many scholars believe that poor water management and usage by humans can influence earthquakes through a phenomenon known as induced seismicity. For example, in 1975, about 8 years after the formation of Lake Oroville in Northern California, the state's second-largest artificial reservoir, a series of earthquakes occurred nearby, the strongest of which registered a magnitude of 5.7. This happened shortly after the water in the reservoir was brought to its lowest level to repair the dam's power plant intakes and then refilled. Several studies investigating the reasons for the seismic event concluded that fluctuations in the reservoir's water level and corresponding changes in the water mass's weight had altered stress loads on a local fault, triggering the earthquakes. Monitoring seismic activity in the reservoir in the years following the earthquakes established a seasonal correlation between the reservoir's water level and seismicity. Seismicity decreases as the reservoir fills in winter and spring, and larger earthquakes tend to occur when the reservoir level drops in summer and fall. So what can we conclude from everything we've discussed so far? We can say this. Until recently, the study of seismic activity was entirely focused on understanding plate tectonics and the processes occurring within the Earth's crust. But now things are changing. In the last decade or so, with the widespread adoption of new technologies like GPS, which have greater spatial distribution and sensitivity, seismologists have started looking at other factors that might influence earthquakes, such as climate, the role of water and ice masses, and seasonal differences. The challenge, however, is to align these connections with fundamental physics. We're certainly not close to predicting when an earthquake might occur due to climatic processes. Even if we know that an external climatic process is potentially influencing a fault system, we still cannot understand if that fault is on the verge of breaking, and if the climate will be able to give it an extra push to make it rupture. The picture is still quite hazy, but at least we can say that understanding that climatic factors can also have an impact gives us an additional element of judgment. Well, after all these considerations, which largely seem to support a small role of climate or environment in triggering earthquakes, why not think that the enormous and variable pressure exerted by the great mass of the Mississippi River can influence the seasonality of earthquakes in the area where the fault and the river intersect in the New Madrid region? The flow of the Mississippi is characterized by wide variations depending on the location and season, generally ranging from 8,000 cubic meters per second to 50,000 cubic meters per second. And during floods, the flow can easily rise to 70,000 cubic meters per second, with a record of 300,000 cubic meters per second measured during the 1928 flood. Could it be? What do you think? If this has been confirmed for changes in the level of the artificial Lake Oroville, why not think that the enormous difference in the flow of the Great River could lead to the same consequences? In any case, the small town of New Madrid, now taken as a symbol of earthquake risk in the region, reportedly tends to take it philosophically, content, as some say, to keep one eye on the Mississippi and one on the hills. New Madrid folk singer Lou Hobbs puts it another way in his signature song, Living on the New Madrid Fault Line. The good Lord, He puts us all here, and only He's going to take us away. Living on the New Madrid Fault Line, you gotta live it day by day.